Good morning, LinkedIn Live crowd. We are also building out our participants over on the Google Meet side. So it's almost noon, and looks like my browser's freezing up. This is unusual. All right, if you're with us on the Google Meet side, I did just send a link for you to join us on the LinkedIn Live side as well, simulcasting this. So this is on LinkedIn Live, Facebook Live, YouTube, Instagram Live, and here in the Google Meet. If you're on the Google Meet and you want to be active in the chat, I would invite you to go over to LinkedIn Live, look at that RSVP that we just sent, and proceed from there. So we've got more folks joining from the Google side, so bear with me just a minute as we get that all going. And I'm having a little bit of lag on my end, so just be patient with me as I get ready, because we are going to have a robust conversation about introverts leading extroverts. And so as we enter into this conversation, I think it's important for me to note that a lot of people, a lot of us assume that extroversion and leadership have to do with each other, and they really, really don't. And so we're going to explore that a little bit. And so, like I said, if you're joining us, if you're on the Google Meet with us right now, and you want to be in the chat, I would invite you to go over to to LinkedIn, where we're monitoring the live chat through this webinar, 12 o'clock. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I don't know why I'm having this lag today. Don't know what's going on. Close a few tabs, see if that is helpful. All right. So bear with me just a second. We're having just a little tech glitch here. Welcome, Tamara. Me on the Google Meet side. If you want to be active in the chat, go on over to LinkedIn Live, and the LinkedIn Live chat will be wide open. But bear with me just a second as we slideshow cooking. And so now, hopefully, those of you on the LinkedIn Live side, my screen. Let's see here. Having this tech glitch here. This is acting a little unusually, so bear with me. So what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about introverts leading extroverts, and hopefully my screen here. And again, forgive me, I'm having a little bit of lag side, but I expect that the lag will go away. We'll be cooking here momentarily. Okay. And view slideshow. All right, so unfortunately right now I'm having a little time with the Google Meet side. On the Google Meet side, You want to, oh gosh, connection lost. What's going on? All right. So y'all are living in interesting times because my tech is just having an issue right now. If you're on I do not understand what's going on the LinkedIn side. If you're on LinkedIn, in the chat, let me know if you can see the slideshow, because I'm having a hard time getting the slideshow to show up for some reason. I do not know what's going on. But you know what, y'all? If you don't know me, then know this. I was an improv comedian for 10 years. So if our technology doesn't work, we're still going to have a conversation, and it's still going to be a great webinar. I'm going to give one more shot to kind of get this correct. See if I can get this to share correctly. Sharing multiple screens. Sure, I understand. And I do not know why it's not sharing my. Yeah. So can anybody in the chat on LinkedIn Live let me know? Do you just see a blue screen? Okay. Thank you, Angela. Okay. 1 second, y'all, because and Key or Kai, Owens, Marty, Tamara on the Google Meet side, bear with me 1 second. We're just having a little bit of a tech glitch on the LinkedIn Live part with the slideshow. And so let me try one more time to share this window. And I think I got it. I think I got it. Let's be optimistic here. I think I got it. Angela, give me a thumbs up if you can see. Aha, yes, if you can see the slideshow. Donna, Angela, Todd on the LinkedIn side, can y'all see the slideshow? Hope so. And we're going to rock and roll. Here we go. So today's topic is introverts leading extroverts. Again, those on the Google Meet side, if you would like in the chat, then go on over to LinkedIn Live. Long passively, that is okay too. So let's get into today's topic. So here's me real quick. This, if you've attended my events before, then you know a little bit about me and my background. I spent 20 years working on college and university campuses teaching leadership, and started getting requests by chambers of commerce and businesses and nonprofits and other universities where I wasn't working to come teach about how to do effective leadership. My doctorate is in leadership, and so I've read more books about leadership than anybody should ever have to. I also have written now a book about leadership, Leading with Emotional Intelligence, which I published last year. It's right here on my shelf, and it's something I'm very proud of. It was a book that was about 21 years in the making, and that's another story for another day. Some fun facts about me: I was not a great college student. It took me 7 years, and my GPA was 2.16. So not the best college student out there, but my failures in college created a well of empathy for me that made me a much, much better administrator within colleges and universities. And so that's a little bit about me. I love Disney World and Drum and Bugle Corps. I was an improv comedian for a long time at the Idiot Box in Greensboro, North Carolina. That's a little bit about my background. Before we get into any conversation about personality type, we have to difference. And so I know a lot of politicians out there have politicized DEI, and they've turned it into this thing. And it's mostly based, most of their representations are based on caricatures of DEI training that are not really grounded in reality. But let me just say this: today's topic isn't DEI training, but you cannot talk about leadership, you cannot talk about introversion and extroversion without keeping in mind that gender is part of us, that race is part of us, that disability status, that regionality, that all of these different things that make us us are with us all the time. Some of my identities: I'm white, I'm a man, I'm cisgender, meaning I'm not transgender, I'm college educated, I'm middle class. There's all these things that make me me. When I leave the house each day, I don't get to leave any of that at home. I don't get to just be like, I'm going to leave man at home and take the rest of me out. No, all of Alan goes where I go. All of you goes where you go. And so from time to time, as we're talking about introversion and extroversion, as we're talking about leadership, as we're talking about managing, as we're talking about connecting your understanding of introversion and extroversion to how you lead more effectively, race is going to come up. Gender is going to come up. We're going to talk about it. We're going to normalize talking about it. I'll tell you that I grew up in North Carolina, and every time a new family moved into the neighborhood, sometimes my mom would act weird. And so at some point, my mom would say, oh, there's some new neighbors in 2 doors down from the Harris family. I think they're black. And they would and my mom would whisper black. I'm like, why are you whispering? Like, what's or neighbors moved in across the street. Oh, I think she's GAY. And I'm like, Mom, I'm 17. I know how to spell. Let's just talk about difference. There is a real thing where people are scared to talk about difference because they don't know the right terms to use. And my company and I, we do workshops on that and workshops on just dealing with your fear and pushing through, because we need to build more understanding. So just note that that's something. I'm in Central North Carolina. FedEx is a big presence here. And I love this example because whenever I go speak to a group, I was just doing leadership training for about 140 some odd leaders at a trucking and logistics company up in Indiana, in Evansville, Indiana. And every audience I speak to, about 25% of them have never noticed that in this FedEx logo on the screen here, and again, the Google Meet folks, let me see if the Google Meet folks can see the screen. If you can't, let me try that real quick here. I think you'll be able to see this. Yep, here we go. The Google Meet screen now. If you look at your screen, you'll see this FedEx logo. And this FedEx logo has hidden within it, between the E and the X, an arrow. Again, 25% of every audience that I address, whether I'm doing a keynote or a workshop, about 25% of people have never seen the arrow before. So in the chat, if today is your first day seeing the arrow, let me know loud and proud, this is my first time seeing the arrow. The reason I'm sharing that is that my hope is, as we talk about introversion and extroversion today, that you have an aha moment, that's going to make you a better leader, a better manager, thinking about this introvert-extrovert dichotomy of the Myers-Briggs, and that once you've seen it, kind of like this FedEx arrow, you can never unsee it. Once you've perceived it, you can never unperceive it. I hope that makes sense. So my hope is that you have one or more aha moments today that make you a better leader or a better manager, and that you can never un-aha those moments. A note about the Myers-Briggs. If anybody joining me today is from an academic background, I know there's a lot in academia about the Myers-Briggs. And the short version is this. When Carl Jung was creating his psychological framework that the Myers-Briggs is based on, we didn't know what we know now about good research methodology, how to form a good study in a responsible way. In his era, they had certain safeguards that they would use, but oftentimes, in his case at least, he was researching just with his client base. He wasn't getting a random sample of people or doing other things that modern universities and modern research organizations would do. So understand that his methodology was a little bit flawed. So take this with a grain of salt. I do as well. That said, having worked with the Myers-Briggs for 20 plus years and worked with a lot of corporations, nonprofits, universities, etc., I have found that when we keep it in its proper context, it's exceptionally valuable. Also, Isabella Briggs Myers, I learned this about 3 years ago, that she wrote a work of fiction. And in her work of fiction, she had some negative stereotypes, racial stereotypes. And if that's in her mind when she's writing fiction, certainly that was in her mind as she was crafting the Myers-Briggs. So again, take a grain of salt. Can we decolonize? Can we bring an anti-racist lens to this? Yes. Can we bring a more methodologically appropriate lens if you're an academic? Yes, we can. And if we do those things responsibly, the Myers-Briggs can be a very, very powerful tool if we proceed with intentionality and awareness, because it can still help us be better leaders and managers. But I want to acknowledge those things before going forward. What's a preference? This is what I love about the Myers-Briggs. Some of you have taken the Big Five or the DISC or Strengths Finders, or there's all of these different assessments. Many of these assessments are trying to measure if you're good at something. Strengths Finder will say you're good at this, you're good at this, you're good at this, right? Here's the challenge and the problem with tests like this that try to measure if you're good at something. We are pretty unreliable at testing, at being honest about what we're good at. So one of the examples I give is that I think I'm a great driver. If I took a quiz that asked me to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how good of a driver I am, I'd give myself a 10 out of 10. If I had an objective third-party person evaluate my driving, they might not give me a 10 out of 10. My perception of my skill is distorted. Sometimes it's distorted positively, sometimes negatively. Sometimes it's about low self-esteem and imposter syndrome. Sometimes it's about ego. The bottom line is any instrument, and I think the Big Five runs into this. I think DISC runs into this. I know most certainly that StrengthsFinder runs into this. Any of these that are trying to ask you what you're good at are going to be a little flawed because they're asking you to evaluate it. Here's the thing about the Myers-Briggs. It's not asking what you're good at. It does not care. It's not trying to measure what you are good at. It's only trying to measure your preferences. Trust me when I say unequivocally, I have a preference for coffee. It's real, y'all. I do have a preference for coffee. And a preference is something that's mine. I am the authority. And it's not about how good or bad I am at drinking coffee. It's just about a preference. When we start leaning into extroversion and introversion, we have to remember that. Another analogy I use is that because some people say, well, I'm both. I'm a little of both. I'm like, great. That's great. Now, I think that Jung and Isabella Briggs Myers would suggest that you probably have a preference and maybe you've learned the other. And the analogy I use here is about driving with both hands. When I drive a car, I use two hands. When I'm an extrovert, I have an extrovert preference. Do I know how to turn on the introvert within me from time to time? Sure. Do I need to do that sometimes? Sure. Do people with introvert preferences have to turn on their extrovert preference? Yeah, a lot more frequently than extroverts are pressured. Most extroverts are not pressured to act introverted. Many introverts are pressured in our workplaces to act more extroverted because they'll get more noticed, they'll get promoted at a higher rate, they'll get their voice heard, etc. So there's a lot of work pressure, societal pressure to act more extroverted for introverts, but not the other. Here's the thing though, is that we can act either way, but deep down we still have a preference, and understanding that preference is valuable. So a lot of times I'm driving my car one-handed, extroverted, until I think, oh, now it's time I need to listen deeply. Then I put my other hand on the wheel so I can channel some introversion, so I can shut my mouth and start listening more closely. So it's important to understand that we all go back and forth between these things. But when all of the things are equal, according to Jung, according to Isabella Briggs Myers, and according to your friend Alan, when all of the things are equal, some of us do have a preference for building our energy from the inside, introversion, and some of us have a preference for building our energy from the outside, extroversion. And we all come to work together and we don't really talk about it. And this is what we're doing today, is we're talking about it. So understand that this is only about preference. This is not about skill. You might think to yourself, well, extroverts are better at making speeches. Extroverts are better at sales roles, etc. I'll tell you that people with a preference for introversion or a preference for extroversion will sometimes seek out activities that fit their preference nicely. And as they do more of those activities, they get better at them. I'm someone with an extrovert preference, and I sought out to take an improv comedy class and then sought out to be an improv comedian. Would as many introverts do that? Maybe not. They could, and they could still most certainly build those skills. I was drawn to those. So understand that sometimes we see extroverted folks have a certain set of skills, or introvert folks have a certain set of skills, and we think, oh, that's because they're an extrovert or because they're an introvert. And I want to say it is and it isn't. It's only because in so much as you have a preference and you've followed that preference through certain activities, certain educational enrichment activities, certain conference sessions you attend, etc., and then built around your preferences. But preferences and skills are different. So for example, I'm about to do with a client, about to do a workshop with about 140 managers on active listening techniques. Everybody can learn to listen actively. And people with extrovert preferences and people with introvert preferences, their entry to learn active listening is different because of those preferences. I hope this makes some sense to folks. Again, and you want to ask questions at any point. In the Google Meet, it's a little harder for me to monitor. And so again, if you're hop on anatomies of the Myers-Briggs, if you're curious about more of these, this is the second series. There are going to be 6 more. And so the last one was Extroverts Managing Introverts. Today is Introverts Managing or Leading Extroverts. The next 2, which I'll mention it on the last slide, are more about intuition and sensing, but they're not called intuition and sensing. The intuitive one is called something to the effect of, why is my boss micromanaging me? If anybody works in HR, any HR people here, if you want to say in the chat, HR people, any HR people, if you've ever looked at exit interviews, you know that being micromanaged or not trusted is a common thing that you hear in exit interviews. Oftentimes, that's a personality thing. It is someone with a deep intuitive preference who's being managed by someone with a sensing preference, We can get into that another day. Those webinars are coming up. Similarly, people with sensing preferences who are managed by people with intuitive preferences sometimes think their boss's head is in the clouds and they're disorganized. So there's sort of a psychological reason for so many of these work behaviors, and we're going to get into those with the future, the rest of this series. So this is it. At the end of the day, people have introvert preferences and extrovert preferences. You may have heard recent conversations about ambiversion, that there is some conversation, especially in the last 5 to 10 years. I'm hearing more and more people say, well, I'm an ambivert. Here's my opinion on ambiversion. I think in most cases that when someone says they're an ambivert, what they're really saying, an ambivert, if you're unfamiliar, is sort of the midway point. If this is a spectrum of extroversion and introversion, if it's a spectrum, that some people are saying there's a midpoint, and that midpoint is ambiversion. Here's the thing about the way the Myers-Briggs was constructed. It's not really a spectrum. It's more like an on-off switch. What if people of all preference feel micromanaged? Could it be more than just personality? Angela, that is a great question. And it may come down to the personality of the supervisor, of the leader. There's certain types, and Angela, I'm going to give an example of one of these types later on. Spoiler alert, there's one called ENTJ. And if you've ever wondered the stereotype we have in our society and our culture about mansplaining or white-splaining, but the quintessential mansplainer is a distinct Myers-Briggs type. It's like, in other words, I can break down for you psychologically with these four Myers-Briggs letters the equation of where mansplaining comes from, right? And so it'll blow your mind later, Angela. So if a lot of people feel micromanaged, it could be that many people on the staff are intuitive and that the supervisor is distinctly sensing. But it also could be this other part. So Angela, hold on to that question. It's a great question. But at the end of the day, people with extrovert preferences tend to prefer to energize from the outside, other people, nature, music, the outside world. People with introvert preferences, when all other things are equal, will want to energize from the inside, right? And again, you're going to hear me say introverts and extroverts, but understand that I mean introverts are people with introvert preferences. Extroverts are people with extrovert preferences. I want to make sure and use that language because I don't like when people use the Myers-Briggs as a label. Because as soon as you use it as a label, as soon as you say that person's an extrovert, the next thought is they can and can't do this. False, false. Can people with extrovert preferences be quiet? Yeah, you're talking to a guy who's been to many a Quaker worship service, which is sitting like an hour in silence, right? So I wrote a dissertation. I had to sit in a library for hours at a time. Can people with extrovert preferences be quiet? Yes. Is it going to drain our battery? Yeah. Can people with introvert preferences be amazing public speakers, be amazing salespeople, be actors, etc.? Of course. Are some parts of that going to drain them? Yes. One of the best speech makers of my lifetime was an introvert. His name was Barack Obama, and he was an introvert, and he was a brilliant, brilliant speech maker and deliverer who was code switching constantly to satisfy different audiences and doing it seamlessly. And again, introvert preference. Obama has an introvert preference. So never, ever, ever think that extroversion and introversion is about what you can or can't do. That is false. It is only about, as you do what you do, are you building energy or losing energy? So that's an important part of understanding what preference is. By the way, if you were in my last webinar, you heard this joke, but I'm going to repeat it in case you weren't. But a lot of times when I'm doing workshops with people, I break them into the extrovert preference and the introvert preference folks. And I'll say, hey, everybody, who knows the phrase resting Mitch face with an M? And of course, overwhelmingly, people don't know that. I think that Kevin Hart maybe made a joke about resting Mitch face once, but in wide scale understanding, it's not a phrase, right? And he was even using the phrase juxtapositionally based on what it rhymes with. Here's one thing to understand, is that people with introvert preferences are often sort of bugged by people with extrovert preferences to act more extroverty, right? Why? And I've been alive 51 years and no stranger has ever told me I need to smile more, ever. And this is something that extroverts do to introverts all the time. But you see my little DEIB, my diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging icon here, because this intersects gender and it intersects race. When I say resting Mitch face, that's not a common phrase, but we know what it rhymes with. We know what it rhymes with. There's this whole stereotype about women who aren't smiling. I can tell you that if you're a person with an introvert preference and you go to work and you happen to be a woman, maybe you just don't want to smile all the time. And so we need to stop that. So if you're listening and you're an extrovert right now, please let's stop that stereotype. Let's stop that stereotype. But that stereotype does speak to how introversion and extroversion intersects gender, and it also intersects race. Because if you're because all women who have an introvert preference have probably dealt with this. And then if you're a Black woman, if you're a Latina woman, there's additional stereotypes that you may get that have to do with both your gender and your race. So we need to stop these stereotypes, and we need to honor introverts for who they are in the workplace. That's hard work because our workplaces are built around extroversion. Isabella Briggs Myers, in her book Gifts Differing, even talked about it and said that in many ways, extroversion is the privileged of the preferences. And so there's a lot to that. And Angela, I'm going to come back to that question. You're going to see that question pretty soon. So the question today, okay, maybe you know you have an introvert preference. Maybe you know you have an extrovert preference. The question today is simply, how can people with introvert preferences lead extroverts more effectively? What are the tools? What are the ways we can understand? Yeah, Angela, even as an extrovert, if you're not, yes, Angela, women of color, even if you're an extrovert and you're just not feeling smiley, you might get that. And Angela, if you understand that people who share identities with you, who also happen to have introvert preferences, they get it all the time, my friend, all the time. So if you're getting it, once or twice a week, understand that people who share common identities with you in terms of race and gender, they're just getting that times 10, because people with introvert preferences tend not to smile by default, and people with extrovert preferences smile more often. So Angela, thanks for sharing that, because that's a nice nuance to add to this. How can we equip introverts to be better leaders? One thing I'm going to mention is, unlike last week's webinar, which was about extroverts leading introverts, when I ask extroverts to think about their introverted staff, many of them have not thought about introverts' needs before. Many of them don't think about it because extroverts are in their own little world. And if they do think about introverts, it's usually from the lens of, why aren't y'all more like us, right? When I do activities where people are asking each other questions, often extroverts will ask questions of introverts, like, why, kind of in the category of, why are you so weird, or why aren't you more like us, right? Introverts, on the other hand, are very aware of extroversion. In other words, it's the amount of time and energy that extroverts spend talking about introverts is minuscule, virtually non-existent. The amount of time and energy introverts spend in thinking about, talking about, navigating extroverts is significantly more. And so again, this speaks to Isabella Briggs Myers saying the extrovert preference is a privileged preference. But also it flavors today's workshop a little differently from last week's webinar, because last week's webinar was me shaking the camera, dear extroverts, pay attention to introverts because you're not paying attention. Here, if you're joining and you have an introvert preference, you're probably painfully aware of extroverts, how they operate, and their expectations. So understand that there's an intersection here, and that I'm much more invested in giving tips to extroverts on how to manage introverts than vice versa, because most people with introvert preferences are very well versed on how extroverts operate, because extroverts are loud about it and we talk about it, and you just know. Here's some practical tips. So understand, particularly if you are an introvert, a leader who's an introvert, understand that you need to enter any brainstorming situation with the knowledge that brainstorming is messy and unwieldy. It just is. People with introvert preferences who have other preferences in the Myers-Briggs, like sensing for their second letter, judging for their last letter, if you have introvert plus sensing plus judging, you probably don't like messy meetings. You probably want meetings that go very, very smoothly. But all introverts, regardless of their type, do have a preference for, let's make sure and we stay on the topic. Let's talk about the topic and stay here. Meanwhile, they see their extrovert colleagues talking about wild ideas and chasing metaphorical butterflies in the brainstorming process, and that can be a source of frustration. So if you're a manager who has an introvert preference, I want you to go ahead and you can make your own little bingo card. And the bingo card can be random stuff I think my extroverted teammates are going to say, right? Where it's about those kind of pie in the sky things, or you could have several spaces on your bingo card for Extroverts go off topic and start talking about what they're having for lunch or the movie they just saw or whatever. How extroverts will go off topic. Meanwhile, the introverts are like, friends, we're supposed to be on topic here. So understand that one of the things you can do if you have an introvert preference and you're managing folks with an extrovert preference is go ahead and embrace, plan for the mess. Plan for it to be a little unwieldy and a little messy. Because for those extrovert folks, that brainstorming process, as their brain engages in whatever you're talking about, a new project at work, a new initiative, whatever it is y'all are talking about, their brain needs to sort of come up for air into their world that's not about the topic every once in a while so that they can get back to the topic. This might seem weird if you have an introvert preference. It probably does seem weird if you have an introvert preference, but just understand that for extrovert folks, those side conversations play a role. They play a role in our ability to stay focused, because it's like focus, focus, focus. If I do too much focus, my energy is going to drop. And sometimes a little side conversation is healthy, right? Now, too much is still too much. But you as an introvert leader, you should, anytime you're thinking about brainstorming, you should go ahead and plan that there's going to be 2 or 3 side conversations. There are. Just plan for it, be ready for it, and ride it like a wave instead of fighting it. I hope that makes some sense for folks. Another tip, and this is classic. I feel like I'm more introverted at work specifically, although I'm definitely extrovert by nature. Yeah, Angela, we call that working out of type. And 2, in our work environments, we are all seeking psychological safety. And that psychological safety intersects gender, it intersects race, it intersects other things as well. So Angela, we could have, oh my gosh, we could go deep. We could go deep there. The second point here is when you're brainstorming is that many people with introvert preferences understand this phenomenon where it's like, yeah, one extrovert said this idea, and then another extrovert pretty much just said the exact same idea, and then a third extrovert just said the same idea again. And the introverts are like screaming inside, we've already said that, we've already said that, we've already said that. Here's what I need y'all to understand. First of all, people with introvert preferences, if they have something to say that they're thinking and someone else says it, they're usually like, cool, someone has said it, we're good. So I want to challenge introvert folks, and this, we talked about this in the last webinar, introvert folks, it's still good to go on the record. If somebody said something and it was the thing you were about to say ditto, amen, right on, friend speaks my mind if you're a Quaker. Say something affirming like, yeah, I was thinking the same thing, because you're going on the record. And if introverts don't go on the record, management doesn't notice as much. So that's an important tip for introverts. But when it comes to introverts managing extroverts, wondering why you got Jason, Stephanie, Jaquan, and Javier, and all 4 of them have essentially said the same thing. And you're like, yeah, no, Javier just said that. Jaquan, why are you saying it? And then Jessica, she just said it. And then why are y'all saying the same thing over and over again? Here's the reality. Extroverts, by nature, as part of their preference, want to be perceived by their community as going on the record. This is why we get so repetitive. This is why one extrovert will say something, and then 3 more extroverts will say almost the same thing, because they want to be seen and noticed and heard by their communities as being on the record, right? It's a natural thing. So number 1, when you're coaching them, you can outside of these brainstorm meetings, you can coach them in the same way. And you can simply say, yeah, hey, you could just say ditto. You could just say right on, agreed. You could say that and shorten our meeting a little bit for the benefit of everybody. That way you're still going on the record, but you don't have to repeat the whole thing, right? And so that tip is valuable for introverts, because introverts who might not even go on the record with their agreement. And it's also a way to manage how much talking the extroverts feel like they have to do, by, you can say to extroverts coaching them one-on-one, hey, if there's something you agree with in our brainstorming session, you don't necessarily have to say the whole thing. You could just say right on, ditto, whatever, right? So understand. But what I hope introvert managers understand is that extroverts aren't saying this to drive you crazy. Extroverts aren't doing this because they didn't hear the last 3 people, although sometimes they're not listening, and that could be a thing. They're saying this because they want to be acknowledged. So you, as a manager or a leader who has an introvert preference, as you're managing and leading extroverts, if you know that part of their type preference, that a preference of theirs means they want to be acknowledged more for their ideas, acknowledge them more for their ideas. Do it before the meeting. Do it after the meeting. If you do it more before and after the meeting, they'll do less of this repetitive stuff in the meeting. So pro tip right there. Another thing, if you were at my last webinar, you heard me talk about breaking into small groups to benefit introverts. Breaking into small groups also benefits extroverts, and I'm going to tell you why. When you break into small groups, the benefits that introverts get is they get to float their ideas without feeling as exposed with a large group situation. If your team is like 18, 24 people, and you're asking for input, many people with an introvert preference will go, this is too many people for me to just throw this thing out. But you group them into little groups of 3, there's a little less pressure. I can test my ideas with a smaller group. Similarly, people with extrovert preferences, if you do a large group brainstorm and all 24 people are talking at the same time, all the extroverts are going to talk, and heap on each other well before introvert voices emerge. If you break them into small groups, the challenge is listen to each other. The challenge is when you're sharing an idea into a giant group of 24 people, that's just sharing an idea into the void. When you're sitting with 3 people where you have to make eye contact, it challenges people with extrovert preferences to think differently about how they're presenting their ideas in a more one-on-one way. So breaking into small groups when brainstorming has benefit for introverts and for extroverts, but the benefit is different. For introverts, it's I'm going to make a more comfortable environment for you to share your thoughts. For extroverts, it's I'm going to make an environment that is going to help you hone your thoughts and make them more personal instead of just throwing them out and repeating. Hope that makes some sense, but it's a valuable tool for brainstorming with introverts and extroverts. If anybody has any, let me know. Angela, hold on to your question about micromanaging because we're going to get there in just a second. Actually, I think it's on this slide. Yeah. When giving tasks, so think about people with introvert preferences as they delegate, as they give tasks to people with extrovert preferences. We do bump into a lot of the other parts of the Myers-Briggs when it comes to this. And if you want to know more, my team and I do workshops about this. Donna, what size small groups? So Donna, to me, it depends on how many people you're dealing with, right? If your team is 80 people, maybe it's groups of 4 or 5. But a group of 2 or 3, there are all kinds of interesting dynamics, right? A group of 2, it's a one-on-one conversation. A group of 3, there's a little bit of play. Once your group is past 5 or 6, depending on how much time you have for this activity, it does still allow for some people to hide and not necessarily participate. And so, Donna, in my experience as someone who's done facilitation for 30 some odd years, to me, I like that 3-person thing when you can do that, because when you're in a group of 3, I think each person does feel some responsibility to contribute. No one can exactly kind of quote unquote hide, but it's also a very manageable size for people with introvert preferences, I think. Yeah. So great question, Donna. Great question. When giving tasks, when delegating, and again, delegating bumps up very much against the second letter of the Myers-Briggs. And so if you're curious about this, the next 2 webinars are about the second letter of the Myers-Briggs. So we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that. But when communicating tasks to extrovert preference people, share a little more information and context than you think is necessary. One of the things that people with introvert preferences do sometimes is they'll think a thought in their head 5, 6, 7, 10 times as they're forming it. They'll say it one time out loud, and their subconscious thinks that everybody heard it all 10 times they thought it before they said it out loud. It's a very, very interesting phenomenon. And my sister is an example. My sister and I, during the pandemic, lived together. And sometimes she would say something, and I'm like, oh, okay, I hear you. And then later she's like, well, I told you like 5 times. I'm like, no, you told me 1 time. But my sister has an introvert preference, I think. And so she might have thought it 4 times leading up to when she said it. And when she says it with the full weight of all 4 times she thought it, and then think that I was around for all 4 of those times. And I wasn't. So people with introvert preferences tend to undershare from one perspective. So as you're giving tasks, it's good to share a little more context, share a little more of your thought process. Now that I've said that, I need to caution you. And if you want to get more into the Myers-Briggs, I've got an online course, which is pretty neat, but also I do workshops, or just take good notes for this entire webinar series, which is free. But But beware if you know your Myers-Briggs type and if you're an INTJ, ISTJ, or ISFJ. These combinations in particular, when sharing that extra context, can sometimes sound like they're talking down to people, can sometimes sound like they don't trust people. And again, the INTJ, and you notice I have a little M next to that on the slide. The INTJ, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you the equation. I mentioned mansplainers earlier. The quintessential mansplainer is actually the ENTJ, extrovert, intuitive, thinking, judging. But INTJs run that risk as well. And the reason is, I'm going to tell you real quickly, N is intuition, T is thinking, and J is about a high degree of preference for organization. When you put intuition, collecting the world around you and all the information you need in a very patterned way, with thinking, which is I'm going to organize this logically, and judging, which is, when I say organize, I mean spreadsheets and the whole 9 yards. When you put NTJ and a blender together, it often turns into people who very much want to explain their process to everybody. Now, the introvert versions might not feel the need to say it all the time, but just know that so introverts take this with a grain of salt, that I think broadly you should share more of your internal process with extroverts you're managing. And as we continue this journey through these webinars, or if you want to take my course, you'll understand that there are other letters that influence this giving task, this delegation thing, that can flavor how micromanaging we might sound. I hope that makes some sense. So put a pin in that. But Angela, as to your question, as far as if an entire team feels micromanaged, I would not be surprised if you're dealing with a manager who is either an ENTJ, maybe an ESTJ, who have these very, very well thought out processes that because they are extroverts, and today we're talking about introverts, but if you look at the extrovert version of these types, they very much want to explain their process to everyone. And in doing that, can talk down to you, can belittle you, can make you feel like you don't, like, I have all the answers, right? It's very mansplaining sometimes. And so there's a whole equation to that. Another thing when giving tasks, and this is fascinating, right? But if you're a supervisor with an introvert preference who's managing folks with an extrovert preference, understand that checking in on them from time to time is valuable. Many times people with introvert preferences, they'll assign the task, and then the next time they want to talk about it is when the task is done. If you're managing extroverts, stop by a couple times. When you stop by their office a couple times, does it have to be about, how's the project going? No, don't say how the project's going. If you want to know how the project's going, phrase it around them as people, not the project. Extroverts want to be seen and experienced. They want their personhood acknowledged, not just the work. Many introvert managers will check in on the work. How's that project going? Think about this phrase instead. How are you doing with that project? Are there things you're struggling with, things that are fun, things that are interesting, things you're learning? What's your experience of this project? It sort of gets at the same question, which is, where are you on this project? But it starts with you, the extrovert person who's doing the project. They want their humanity acknowledged in the process of you checking in on the work. I hope that makes sense. So if you're an introvert manager and you typically go to extroverts you manage and lead, and you're like, where are we on this project? How's this project going, etc. And the noun in your sentence is always the project, the project, the project. Make the noun in your sentence the person doing the project, and those extroverts will feel more valued, more seen, more heard, more respected as part of your team. So pro tip for people with introvert preferences, when you do a check-in, say, how are you doing with this project? Are there supports I can give you? Is there anything, are you finding anything interesting about the project? What's your experience of the project? And then let them extrovert for a minute. Let them go, well, I tried this first, and I tried this, and I tried this, but now I'm doing this, and it's working better. Let them extrovert a little bit. That's going to help them stay attached to this work, right? So hopefully that makes some sense. So you want to know how the person's doing with the task, not just how the task is doing. Sometimes pop by and say hello, and don't talk about the task, especially if it's a very isolating task. I'm someone with an extrovert preference, and my first job after I got my master's degree was I was a retention specialist. So I was doing large scale data modeling using Excel spreadsheets, which as an extrovert was not my cup of tea. It wasn't my preference. I was working outside of preference. Am I capable of that? Yes, I'm capable of that. Did it tire me out? Yes, it tired me out. Did my boss know that if he had just given me a project that was going to take me 8 hours sitting at my desk by myself with the numbers, that he should stop by in the middle of the morning, right? So I start my work at 9. He should stop by at 10:30 and just be like, Alan, you doing well? You doing well with the project? How are you feeling about things? Kind of like that last tip I gave. Then at lunch, if I'm sitting there at my desk doing lunch, he's like, dude, you need to go out for lunch today. You need to get out of the office a little bit, because I'm an extrovert. You're starting to break up the monotony, right? And then the afternoon when I'm back at my desk at 1 o'clock doing this boring spreadsheet stuff. And by 2:30 or 3, the boss comes by and doesn't just check how I'm doing. He says, Alan, hey, there's a coffee shop right around the corner. Let's just go grab a cup of coffee, 10, 15 minutes, go there, get a cup of coffee, come back. Acknowledging that breaking up the monotony for people with extrovert preferences is so important for their efficiency, so important for their work happiness, for their for how effective they're doing their work. So many introverts, sometimes if they have a solo project like that, they can shut their door and just be like, oh, great, I finally just get to work by myself with no interruptions. If you think that, that's you, and that's awesome. And if you're managing extrovert colleagues, they are secretly wishing for interruptions. They are like, oh my gosh, this Excel sheet's going to be the death of me. Please, 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 can I have some interruptions, right? So you as their manager can make some small intentional interruptions, and they will be more effective and feel more trusted and honored by you in that process. So that I sort of combined bullet point 3 and 4 in that regard. If anybody has any other questions, please jump in. We're almost done. We might end a little early today. When thinking about teaming, this is more left over from my extrovert conversation, but there are valuable things here too. Is that if you are an introvert who manages extroverts, those extroverts, when it comes to team bonding, building morale, they want the big after work happy hour, or they want we're going to go to a high ropes course and do team building. They want that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, people with introvert preferences sometimes feel anxiety about those things, sometimes feel pressure about those things. So the best way to meet teams in the middle, because odds are pretty good that you're managing folks who are both introverts and extroverts, people with both of these preferences. So here's the best thing to do. And this comes from, believe it or not, and I went to Appalachian State University, which is in the mountains of North Carolina, for those of you who might not know. And up there, it felt like everybody did high ropes courses and low ropes courses because we were in the mountains, and that's what we did. Team building in the woods. It was just a normal part of being at a university called Appalachian State University, right? One of the things that is in the art and science of outdoor experiential education, the high ropes course, is that people have a comfort zone, that you want to start them in their comfort zone, then stretch them a little, then stretch them a little more, and stretch them a little more. And that's when they're going to learn. That's when they're going to bond the best, etc. If you stretch them too much too fast, they stop learning. They go to fight or flight. They shut down. And suddenly their inner monologue is about, I can't wait for this to be over. They disengage. So even though that mindset about comfort zone, a little out of your comfort zone, a little more out of your comfort zone, even though that science of learning has sort of grown up in the high ropes course, low ropes course world, you as a leader and manager can use the same technique. What I mean by that is, say that you do want to have a large group team building activity. Say that you're going to bring in, like my company or some other company, and do some team building, right? And team building by definition is sort of a little extrovert heavy. The extroverts tend to enjoy it, get energized by it. Meanwhile, introverts may have some anxiety about it, may get their energy depleted from it. You still know that it's valuable because you want your team to be more cohesive. But here's the trick, and these are some great points. If you know that's coming up, say you're planning a team building exercise, a 2-hour team building exercise in April. Here's what you do. In March, create some small team building opportunities for have a budget for coffee gift cards where you say anybody who wants to pair up or make a small group of 3 or 4 to get a coffee gift card and go get to know your colleagues better. Come by, you can check out the gift card and then bring it back. You can say, if you want to check out this card, I need you to bring at least one person with an introvert preference and one person with an extrovert preference with you. Because we want to team build, and we understand that people with introvert preferences might not always volunteer, but when there's a smaller social situation, might be able to build some team and some camaraderie. Do that in advance of that bigger thing. This is comfort zone, and then it's like a little bit out of your comfort zone, and then a little more, and then a little more. By the way, shameless plug, if you ever want team building done by me and my team, we do very, very introvert aware team building. In other words, if I have 2 hours of team building, I start with some individual activities, then I move into small group activities, and constantly I'm checking back in. And it's not just from the get, we're all doing some activity where we're holding hands and moving a hula hoop around or whatever, because you do not start there, my friends. You may never even go there at all. But there's sort of an art and science to how do you get people comfortable in that team building environment. So the last thing is when giving feedback, right? Feedback is always difficult. And this, you'll notice these 2 bullet points here. The second bullet point definitely bumps up against other parts of the Myers-Briggs, which is a good teaser for the next 2 free webinars. One thing that you need to understand if you have an introvert preference is that you'll notice that extroverts often beat around the bush, do too much talking, talk about other stuff. And many introverts think to themselves, that is wasted talking. This could have been an email. Why are you doing all that talking? In addition to the function it plays with brainstorming, where those extroversions, they're letting your brain come up for air to think about something outside the task so they can focus back on the task. In addition to that, part of this beating around the bush is that extroverts want to remind everyone of their humanity and be seen and acknowledged and understood for their humanity in and amongst the work that we're doing. And this talking about things that are outside of work and social is that these people with these extrovert preferences want to be known and acknowledged by their community for being the people they are, separate from the work they're doing. This is huge, y'all. And many people with introvert preferences only have the frustrating part of this, which is why are these extroverts off topic so much? Why are they talking about all these things that aren't the topic? I want to challenge people who are introvert leaders to understand that this talking about the stuff that's off topic is extroverts bumping up against corporate culture, bumping up against company culture, and saying, I am a human even when I'm at work, and it's okay for me to talk about this movie that I'm excited to see this weekend. And me talking about that means I get to keep a little of my humanity before we get into this task, or while we're in this task and we're on like a little lull in the conversation. So understand, if you're a manager who has an introvert preference and you really want to lead people with extrovert preferences more effectively, you will embrace that that's sort of part of it, that the talking about their lives outside of work helps them feel more acknowledged and more valued as part of your organization. So get on board, be okay with it. So, and again, some introverts will practice this. Many introverts have practiced small talk. What's fascinating is when I ask extroverts about, well, how do you prepare for small talk? Extroverts are like, tell me what small talk is again? And what do you mean prepare for small talk? The concept of small talk has space in most introverts' brains. The concept of small talk doesn't have space in most extroverts' brains because it's not a conscious thing you do. It's just who you are. It's just how you are in and around other people. I hope that makes some sense. So some small talk is valuable. Asking them about their lives is valuable. It's important. The next part is, and this is when giving the tougher feedback, and this again bumps up against another letter of the Myers-Briggs in particular, and I've highlighted those in purple to give you the breadcrumbs for this. When you're giving that difficult feedback, when people who are introverts receive feedback, typically, now again, they have 3 other letters of the Myers-Briggs too, so all other things are not equal, but typically people with introvert preferences aren't going to take all feedback personally. They will take some feedback personally, but not all feedback personally. Now, your introverts who are feeling for their 3rd letter, especially if feeling is their dominant, if you want to learn about dominant Jungian things, again, I've got a course for that. And I've also got a book coming out in April, which I'm very excited about. But if you have introverts who have feeling as their dominant, they may take some things personally. But let me say this. Extroverts who have feeling as their 3rd letter are very, very prone to taking feedback personally. And so how do you manage that? If you're someone with an introvert preference and you know it's not personal, you know it's just about performance, but you say it and they take it personally, how do you manage that? I'm going to give you a management technique that's a spin on a management technique you probably have heard of, but this is a way better way of doing it. Some of you have heard of what's called the positive sandwich. The positive sandwich is, and this was popular in MBA programs, business programs in the 80s, and in management and coaching courses in the 80s and 90s. It's like, well, when you need to give difficult feedback to an employee, first compliment them on something they've done, which is the piece of bread in the sandwich. Compliment them on something they've done, then get to the meat of the issue and say, you need to get better at this. Then put another piece of bread on top, which is, and you did good at this other project too. Y'all, the positive sandwich is cliche, it's overdone, and it's really not effective. It's not effective because as soon as we know it's a difficult conversation, that we see those pieces of bread as sort of disingenuous, inauthentic, right? I'm going to change this up. Instead of doing the positive sandwich, do what I call Alan's giant plate of meat. And here's the plate of meat. This is what I mean. There's no bread involved. You do not fabricate compliments. Instead, the plate is the foundation. When you're about to give someone feedback, especially if you are an introvert manager, giving an extrovert team member, especially if that extrovert team member is also feeling that third letter in Myers-Briggs that you see on the screen, the one I highlighted in purple, extrovert feelers. The plate is this. You set the plate. The plate is, hey, look, Jeremy, I'm going to give you some tough feedback, but before I give you that feedback, I need to remind you, you're valuable to this organization. You are valuable. You provide value. If you didn't provide value, I wouldn't be giving you this feedback. That's the plate. It's this thing where I'm saying, you as a person provide value here. Extrovert feeler. I need to tell you so that you are not confused, so that you don't think that this feedback about your performance is an indictment of your character or your worth as a person or your worth in this organization. It is just about that behavior. And I know for some introverts, you're like, well, why would we say all this extra stuff? If you want to manage them better, you'll say this extra stuff. You'll drop the positive sandwich, which is the fakey compliment, then the meat, then the fakey compliment, because they know the fakey compliments are fake. They know they're disingenuous. They don't resonate. It doesn't work. Instead, drop the bread. Plate of meat. The plate is a definitive statement. You have value here. I'm going to give you some feedback. The feedback's not about your value as a person. It's not about your value to this organization. It is about a behavior, and we're going to need to talk about it, but it's not about your value. So don't get that mixed up. And now I want to see you get better at this. Here's the meat. I have confidence that you can get better at this. Or maybe you don't have confidence. You say, I would like to believe that you can get better at this. So understand, when you're an introvert managing extroverts, especially if those extroverts have feeling as part of their preference, making sure to decouple their value to the organization and their value as a person from the behavioral thing you need to address is huge and will take you much further. It is 12:56, y'all. Coming up soon on March 12th and March 20th, we have two coming up. My coworkers are overly vague and our supervisors are always micromanaging. Those two, my coworkers are overly vague, is designed to speak to people with S for their second letter, sensing. People with sensing preferences often think that their intuitive supervisors are overly vague. Flipping that script, people who are intuitive, who have sensing supervisors, often think those supervisors are micromanaging them and talking down to them. So we'll get into that as we go. A few other notes. This is a whole series. Please share and RSVP. Just take a look at the events at Adaptive Challenge Consulting's LinkedIn, and you can RSVP for all these. Invite some friends as well so we can expand the conversation some. Also, I've got great books, a book coming up, but I've got a book called Improv Comedy, The Art of Leadership that just came out at the end of last year. My first book, Leading with Emotional Intelligence, is starting to sell well now, which is very exciting. And so a lot of people are getting that book. Also, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Kelly Dixon, and also a friend of mine, who's someone who I consider a friend now, Dr. Danielle Green, I have this amazing book called The Disruptive Leader. And you can also get that from my website, adaptivechallengeconsulting.com. I share that as a combination book with Leading with Emotional Intelligence, because here's the thing that's so cool. As Dr. Green and Dr. Dixon were writing The Disruptive Leader, I was writing Leading with Emotional Intelligence. And we did not plan this, but each one is such a great complement to the other. So you can get that book combination as a combo. But otherwise, y'all, thank you for your time today. Oh, by the way, there's the team. That's the Adaptive Challenge Consulting team there. Thank you for your time today. And connect with me on LinkedIn, connect with Adaptive Challenge Consulting on LinkedIn. And I hope to see you at next week's free webinar. Have a great afternoon. Take care.